Welcome to Don't Quote Me on That. One day we will have an intro, but today is not that day. Hello, hello, hello. I'm Kalina, and welcome back to Don't Quote Me on That, where we kind of talk about movies. And we is just me today. Doing a solo episode. I have some free time now. I think I told you guys in the last episode, but somebody tore their ACL and can't do anything. And now they have to find a way to fill all their free time. So this is what we're doing. I wish I had more fun stuff to update you with, but when Eleanor's not here, I don't. So I guess we'll get right into it. I'm checking the time just so I don't talk to you for too long. But let's get started. The title of this should be Under Pressure because that is what I watched and want to talk to you about. And Under Pressure is a 4-episode docu-series on Netflix about the I'll actually read you the description of the show. It says, follow U.S. women's national team as they endure the highs and hardships of competing on the biggest stage in the world at the 2023 FIFA World Cup. Um, so I watched that. The first chunk of this will be about the show itself, just like the filming, the soundtrack, editing, pacing, things like that. But it was only 4 episodes. They were pretty short episodes. And so while I have some strong opinions on the show, a lot of this will, I think, kind of devolve into sport in general. But for anyone who doesn't know, I'm a pretty proud athlete. I'm proud of my identity as an athlete. I play water polo. Been an athlete for my whole life. I've been playing water polo specifically for 11 years, I want to say. So I like talking about sports. I like talking about media, but I also really enjoy, I think, more than that, talking about high performance sports. And there's no Eleanor here, so I get to do what I want. But Eleanor, if you're watching this, please come back. I'm so bored and so much less entertaining. I watched Under Pressure for some background. I don't know anything about soccer, let alone the U.S. women's national team specifically. Like I said, I'm a fan of sport. I'm a fan of high performance in anything, but specifically athletes. So I've watched a little soccer. I've watched hockey. I live in South Florida, so Panthers are big here. I've watched a little basketball. I watched a little bit of everything except probably American football. Um, so I can appreciate sport on a variety of levels. Also, it feels really weird to keep calling it soccer because in my house it's a football household. So there's that. I touch on this, and the reason it's football household is because my dad is from Jamaica, so he calls it football. I grew up calling it football. My dad will also be chiming in on this because, as I said, I don't know anything about soccer, and he's our resident soccer expert, but he didn't want to be on camera. So if sometimes you see a clip and it's me, but in a different shirt, and there's a disembodied Jamaican man talking in your ear, that's my dad. Everybody say thanks to him, please. So, Under Pressure, these are my notes. We'll get right into it. Just want to go over the beats of the show as a whole. My main thought on the show, it was very strangely paced. It didn't commit to being a docu series enough. Like it couldn't seem to decide who its focus was. Like yes, the focus was the US women's national team, but they picked, I want to say, 3 to 4 players on that team to really hone in on and follow their journey in making the team and then going to the World Cup. But it didn't do it in a way that made any sort of sense to me. Like they overcommitted in some episodes, then they were backtracking timeline wise, then they like would hone in on one specific person for like 20 minutes and then all of a sudden they're like, oh yes, here's the rest of the team that exists and we care about them. And it's like I don't, because you haven't given me anything, you know? So just talk about filming, brief notes on the filming. They did a lot of talking heads, so like just these portions where they're interviewing the players and they kind of use that as voiceover for a lot of footage, but also sometimes we'll just get kind of like how I look now, the talking head. Um, they felt personal. I really liked how they framed up the talking heads. It felt like it wasn't just like the same background for everybody, so everyone wasn't in the same studio, and they made efforts to do them in different locations in the sense that, let's say, 3 talking heads were filmed in those people's homes, but one was filmed in the kitchen, one's filmed, it like gave them variety. It gave you some personality, which obviously had to do some with where's the best place to set up this camera in this shot, but I also think it added to the diversity of the mise en scène, let's say, whatever's on the screen, and like the people telling the narratives, kind of giving them each distinct voices. So I thought that was well, and it felt like homey almost because they're filmed in these like familiar spaces. Obviously, used a lot of C-roll footage. So like, which honestly, I can't remember if that's the correct term. So like, A-roll footage is like what I'm filming. Like this is A-roll, right? Filming, I'm talking. This is the stuff. B-roll is like random stuff that's relevant. Usually they'll use it when they're doing like using the audio from a talking head. They'll put B-roll footage over that. C-roll footage to me, from my understanding, from what I remember from school, is like they're basically using clips from previous World Cups, for example. So not stuff they filmed, but stuff that still contributes to the story. That's just the nature, I think, of a sports documentary in any capacity. My question was two questions I had. One, why are car shots so close up? You know, when like the car, like if I'm behind the driver's seat and they're filming from the passenger seat, the camera's like in your face, and I just feel like they should have come up with a better camera, like a better zoom out or something by now, because we don't need to be all up and close and personal. And if we're gonna be in the car with them, just film from the back seat, or like I don't know, stick a GoPro on it. I'll take lower camera quality for less in your face. That's just me personally. Also, I want to know was everyone mic'd because, as I said, they followed 3 to 4 players pretty regularly, so they obviously had mics on while they were training. But like we're at this training camp, selection camp, and I can't imagine at the time they know who's going to make it all the way through because the coaches are still making that decision. So I want to know how many people they mic'd up and how much stuff was cut out. But that's just me wondering things, not really a comment or criticism or critique in any way, shape, or form. My main critique is in regard to the editing, which I'll get to last in this section. Next, moving on to the soundtrack, there was too much music in this. The first episode specifically, like the music never stopped playing. It changed, the song changed, the volume changed, the pacing changed, but it just felt like there was just non-stop music playing in the background, and like I don't need all that. Sometimes you can let the moment sit and let the person talking, let that voice sit, and you don't have to add dramatic music in background for me to understand that it's a dramatic moment. I thought there was a very good use of sound effects, however. It's a sports documentary. We do need to build the tension. Again, music's not always the way, or like not the only way to do that, but we do need to build the tension. And like specifically, there's some penalty kicks at the end, like the last episode, I believe, like one of the last episodes, and they like the music fades out. It's like if you hear your heartbeat in your ears and it's real slow. So like I like that. It built the tension. It brought me in the moment. I felt like I was taking the penalty kick. I kind of wanted to throw up a little. Crazy. There's also like some sound effects in terms of like inhale, exhales, like people trying to calm themselves down, and these isolated sounds. So I thought that was done very well. They used a Hosier song in one episode, and like I don't that emotionally compromised me, and I think that was a cheap shot on the part of the editors. So thanks. And there was I described it as like a crunchy sound in the first episode. They're at their training camp for the World Cup, and these two players like jump up to get the ball, and their heads hit each other, and it was like a crunchy sound. Didn't care for that at all. Like I liked it in terms of like appreciating the art. Didn't like any other aspect of it though. So thank you for that. Now, here comes my gripe with Under Pressure. The editing. The pacing was strange. From episode 1, I said the pacing was strange. We are in episode 1 we're following the training camp they're going to and they like go through it over a couple weeks to determine if they're going to make the roster for the World Cup. Then all of us and then at the end of episode 1, the three like newbies we've been following are waiting for their phone call from the coach to find out if they made the team or not. Okay? We've seen a couple other people, but like these are the 3 people that like haven't been on the team before. They're anticipating, "Oh my god, did I make the team?" Right? Then we go to episode 2. And what do we do in episode 2? We backtrack in timeline and start following some other girl. I don't care. You left me on a cliffhanger. I don't care. And then when we actually reveal who, like, they only revealed the phone calls, I think, for like 2 of them, 1 or 2 of them, so not the third person. So then I'm like, oh, I guess I just have to assume that that person didn't make the team. No, they did. They just threw that in later. Who edited this? It like this will come up as I go through the episode specifically, but my main like issue was that it couldn't decide who the focus was, and it also didn't it like committed to the weirdest timeline in the world. It like really wanted to be a documentary series about the US women's national team, but it focused on 4 or 5 players, let's say we saw pretty regularly and spoke to or heard from pretty regularly. And then all of a sudden in the last episode they're introducing a player I've never seen. Not like some of them you saw in the background and they came in the later episodes talking. I've never seen her and all of a sudden she's on my screen talking and she gets a title card. So I think they either needed to hone in on one specific player who I'll name later and let everyone else be fringe characters essentially in it, which they kind of did, but then every once in a while they're like, oh, this is about the team, so I guess I do need to include these other people. And then I like heard from even out of like the 4 consistent people we heard from, I heard from like 2 of them way too much. And the other 2 I was like, I mean like I could take you or leave you, you know? So I just they needed to commit to either doing a player profile, one specific player profile, or even like 2 player profiles and like, take a returning player and a new player. Or commit to doing a team profile. But they kind of hovered in this middle ground and I don't think it worked. Because the World Cup is like a one-time event. Obviously it's happening over a series of days. But because it's a set event in time that will start and finish, it needed to have a chronological timeline. I didn't the backtracking was really confusing. I didn't understand what it's like they told a different story in each episode. So like one episode's about the players making the team. Next episode is about the World Cup. The next episode is about like women's sport as a whole and why this is so it's like I think they should have titled those themes and follow them all equally throughout the 4 episodes rather than dedicating an episode to each of them because we were backtracking and I didn't feel like we spent enough time building anything to get back to whatever the present was that we left off on. So anyway, it was just strangely paced, strangely edited, not a well produced show, in my opinion. The content was interesting, but just purely from the nature of it being about pro sports on such a high level and these like athletes at the top of their game, not through anything that the Netflix producers and editors and filmmakers did. Sorry. But that's all me done for the general tidbits about the show. So I'll give you an episode by episode breakdown. We'll talk a little bit about sport. We'll talk a little bit about soccer. We'll talk a little bit about women's sports specifically. And then I'll let you go. Okay, so we're in our first episode, and I'll tell you, in this first episode, we see the coach's name, which is Vlatko Andonovsky. There's like a title card for him. I kid you not, 5 times. It says Vlatko Andonovsky, head coach. I'm like, all right, I'm with it. I can remember him because this is one of 2 men we see in this show. Okay, he pops back up on the screen the next time. Vlatko Andonovsky, head coach. And I was like, okay, like maybe they just think our attention span is short. We forgot. Third time, but we got it. That's Vlatko Andonovsky. I know he and I are like besties at this point. By the number of times you've put up his name and title, that's kind of back to my editing complaint, so I'll forgive you. And then there was like some players where they introduced once, didn't give me their names multiple times, and I needed their names multiple times. I wrote down everyone's name on a note in my computer, and I could only probably remember, like, put a face to a name for 2 of them. So, do better. So, in episode 1, we open, and one of the first things that is said is respect of wearing the crest and playing for your country. I was talking about this with Eleanor, I think. We spoke about it the last episode, but if not, we were talking about it recently. And this concept of nationalism is almost like strictly an American phenomenon. Like you can be proud, like lots of people are. You see it all the time. People are proud to be from the countries they're from. I think, patriotic is also a good. Like it feels like that feels very American to me. Like obviously, other countries can be patriotic. Other countries can have pride in their nation, pride of where they're from. But the level to which it's taken, like to me, the word patriotic is just almost strictly an American term, except for when it comes to sports. I think sports, especially on a global scale, is the exception. So when like the Olympics come around, all the countries are like, yeah, my country's the best and I'm so proud to be from here. And they're like really proud of anyone who's succeeding. But the Americans have had so much time to practice being obnoxious that they're on another level, which is fine. I think that's the place to do it. Is like, the Olympics, the World Cup, but can we tone it down a little bit? It's a little embarrassing. They also kind of set up the beginning of the story to be, it feels like we're setting us up for an emotional journey, which like we are, but it feels like we start off negatively essentially. The quotes coming in from people, and what I really liked that they did though is they not just had quotes from like reporters and columnists and former football players, but they had quotes from the head coach and like people who were on the teams, like Megan Rapinoe, kind of speaking negatively about the team, almost kind of like starting us in a low point so we had something to build to later on. The next quote that I thought was nice was, "It's not just about losing a game. The big risk is that they become irrelevant." So they're coming off of this high. I think they won two World Cups in a row before the 2023 World Cup. Like they're top of the game. They've defined what is international women's soccer, right? This U.S. national team. So the fear is not just will they succeed again. It's like they're gonna fall off the map of international soccer. Are the stakes higher for a women's sport? I am of the philosophy that yes. In a later episode, they talk about how for the 1999 World Cup, which is like kind of the start of this modern era of U.S. women's soccer dominance, that they had to prove, like after that 1999 World Cup, the 99ers they were called, they had to prove that the investment in their sport was worth it. They're like going out to people, they're trying to sell tickets. So they had to prove that all of that was justified. Even though they won and they were like defining the sport for years after that, you have to justify someone giving you that opportunity. You have to justify someone giving you that platform. And a little later, might be in this episode, but they talk about how like these athletes need to transcend sport. They can't just be football players. They have to be spokeswomen and do the, like one of them's a mom, right? And that's like kind of a journey. She's like coming back to this World Cup after having a kid, and she's training, but she's also at the opening for this thing. She's doing interviews, she's doing social media posts, she's like announcing, this and this. Like these women can't just be football players, which is sad. Like you want to play your sport and you want to be known for your sport, but in order to get your sport any sort of respect outside of that outside of that what is a relatively small community in the grand scheme of things, you have to be not just like show up, but you have to be exceptional at a bunch of other things as well. Also, there's the pressure of like following success, specifically when it's your own success. So it's not like, oh, it's the last time we won this was when the 99ers won it, and now like yeah, it's the US, but it's a completely different team, completely different environment. Or oh, whoever won it last, like we've swapped out the whole team from them. It's not that. So the stakes get higher, but also I think the desire to see you fall is higher as well. Like, yes, you've succeeded, so more people want to see you succeed, but more people also want to see you not succeed because, well, you've done it already. How good do you think you are? So we are 7 months out to the World Cup. I think it's crazy how quickly this all comes out. Like they haven't picked the squad yet, and they're 7 months out. Oh, it's Alex Morgan. That's the one I was talking about. That's the mom. And they talked about how Alex Morgan transcends sport. And they're like, everyone knows, even if you don't know soccer, everyone knows who Alex Morgan is. You know that, you know that video of Kiki Palmer? She's like, I'm so sorry to this man. I do not know who he is. That's me. I've never heard of Alex Morgan in my life. But another question I had to pose to you now is, what athletes do you think transcend sport? And I also realized that I think a lot of times, a lot of the athletes that I think transcend sport are women. And it's probably because they have to be multifaceted to even be taken seriously as an athlete. So the athletes that I think transcend sport, those first two that come to mind are Simone Biles and Serena Williams. I also wrote down Michael Phelps. I do think Michael Phelps is the prime example of this, and then also Jackie Robinson. And I also wrote down Lewis Hamilton because I'm a little bit into F1 now, and Lewis Hamilton is a fashionable gentleman. I also think that female athletes, when they transcend sport, they are almost strictly boxed into transcending it as it relates to being a woman and female empowerment and women in sport. Like they transcend sport in that they're empowering women by playing on the field, but they're also empowering women by giving speeches and by designing clothes that are actually meant for female athletes. Whereas I feel like male athletes get to transcend sport in more fun ways. Back to my Lewis Hamilton example, he was what the co-chair for the Met Gala. Um, he produced the F1 movie, so like they get to diversify their palette a little bit more. But we continue on with the episode. I just wondering what the longevity of a women's football player is. So if you could let me know. Megan Rapinoe had some good quotes in this show, and one of them is I always say it's the worst job in the world because if you do your job, then you were supposed to, and if you do one hair less, then you're gonna get lambasted for it. First of all, lambasted is such a fun word. I haven't heard anyone use in a long time. But also, I when she started the quote, it was like I always want to say it's the worst job in the world. There was like a brief pause, and I was like, I mean, like I can understand every job has its challenges. I was a professional athlete, not on this level, but I was a professional athlete and I understand the concept of yeah, as much as this is my dream job, it's difficult, but I was like it's kind of out of touch to be saying that right now. But with the rest of the quote, yes, if you do one hair less than what's expected, it's like the end of the world. And if you perform to standard or better, it's like great, but like that's what we wanted you for, you know? So kind of being able to manage these ups and downs that a lot of people have put stake in. I say like when you're a professional athlete, you it's hard because you have more managers than ever. In the sense that those people watch it, like not just you have the manager on your team and sponsors even, who I think are valid people to listen to and draw or take criticism from, but you have all of these fans who are rooting for you, but also like kind of not rooting for you. So you have a whole bunch of managers, and like the more managers you have, the less people you can make happy, percent like proportionally. So I think that's interesting. We're now 4 months out to the World Cup. We're still in episode one. 32 and still being a first time national team contender. So this is about Kirsty, Christy, Christy Muse. I liked her a lot. I felt like the show should have been framed around her, which we'll touch on as we keep going. But she was one of the three like first timers that we were following in this episode. Um, I had some thoughts about sports siblings because Christy's sister played, and they said something about how like they could never be successful at the same time. And I imagine that must be difficult. And kind of thinking about being teammates as we're going through this World Cup camp, it's these people who you're competing against, but you also have to work with in these drills, but also like they're they're the first in line rooting for you to fail. But if you both make the team together, then you have to trust them like implicitly, and just kind of how that flip flops back and forth. Obviously, I think being siblings adds an extra layer to that because you, when you're a sibling, like you gotta. I have a brother, and sibling relationships are very much, in my experience, that there's no in between. Either oh my god I love you and you're my best friend, or I will be the person to take you out of this world. So having that sort of dichotomy, which you can have with a teammate, but you then have to take it home. And I've coached siblings and I'm like, you can't be related to each other here. You have to be teammates here first, because while the dynamic of the relationship might be the same between siblings and teammates, the lengths you can go to with a sibling are very different than the lengths you can go through with a teammate. So being able to separate that, I think, creates a lot of maturity early on when you play the same sport as your sibling. But I don't play the same sport with my sibling, so don't quote me on any of that. So we're at the last camp before the World Cup, and talking about one of the players said that they're in it for themselves, and just kind of this idea that you have to balance individual goals with your team play. So you want to make the team. You want to, I don't know, maybe score a goal in the World Cup. You have specific goals. You want to achieve these things. And how can you fold that in to what's best for the team, because at the end of the day, football is a team sport and you need to succeed together. And someone else's goals might directly clash with yours. And as I said earlier, if you're selected, having to shift from every man for himself fully into a team mindset. And this kind of made me think about injury. Also, especially now that I'm injured. But is injury worth living the dream once? Because if you go into it, I mean, even if you don't know, but like, there's a chance of injury when you're active at that, especially at that level. There's a chance of injury no matter what. And is it worth pushing yourself to the limit, even if you know you're straining yourself a bit too much, if you get to live your dream? Or should you scale back and prioritize your health? Which I think is a question only, like that can be answered only on a person to person basis. Now we're 4 weeks. Yeah, okay, yes, then we backtrack, okay? We backtrack and we're 4 weeks out from the World Cup. How did we get here? They like left us on a cliffhanger. They're like, I don't know. They're like calling these people, and like these girls are waiting by the phone. They're like, Vladko's gonna call me, or he's texting me. He's like, can I call? And like, we don't know what the answer is gonna be. And now we're 4 weeks. Then we just backtracked 4 weeks. We're following Christy. I want to say Alyssa, and another lovely lady whose name I don't remember. But we're following these three players. They're waiting for their phone call to find out if they made the team. Okay. And Vladko says something that I thought was interesting. He says, the only question is, how will they help us win a World Cup? So you have to not think about who the best player is, who's got the best attitude, who's got the most experience, who can bring the most to the team, but how do all of these people that I'm picking, all 23 people, how who's going to work together the best? And in what ways are their specific individual skills and collective skills going to help us win a World Cup? So I wonder if some people who are like more technically skilled get looked over because they're not as good of a team player, you know? So one other thing I said he thought was interesting. He said that I thought was interesting was that the first picking the first 10 people is easy. The middle people you're like, all right, fine, plug and play them. The last three is like really difficult, and we end up picking 23 people. 20. Sorry, we end up picking 23 people in total. We're waiting for the phone call. I'm nervous. You're nervous. They're nervous. Episode 2 starts. We've backtracked to 3 months before the World Cup. Why? I was very upset about this decision. And I was like, you know what? This is an artistic choice. We were on the edge of our seat in the last episode. They want to build a little more tension before we find out who made the team. No, they didn't. Okay, I'm gonna spoil it for you right now. No, they didn't. Because they go to 3 weeks, then they go to 4 weeks before the World Cup and we find out who gets picked. We go to 5 weeks before the World Cup. We go to 2 weeks before. Pick a side. Like if you're gonna backtrack, you start at 3 months and you work your way slowly forward. You don't go forward and then back and then forward and then forward and then back. Anyway, I'm sorry. Alyssa's family. So Alyssa is she was like 18 or 19, I want to say, when she's getting picked for this. She's waiting for the phone call. She was someone she like was an exceptional player. She graduated high school. Well, she must have been 18 because we saw her high school graduation in this. Graduated high school and like didn't go to college. She just went straight into playing professional soccer. So this is her first time like being considered for the World Cup. She's really nervous. And every time we see her waiting for the phone call, she's like sitting at her kitchen table. She like just looks isolated and alone and like very nervous. Obviously, she gets the call. She's selected. She's obviously very excited. And then like the camera kind of pulls out and turns around. You see her whole family's in the house with her. And I really liked this bit of filming and editing and framing because I think it did a really good job of showing you how yes, you have support. Yes, people love you and your parents drive you to practice and your friends come out to watch your games and your teammates lift you up and inspire you and make you better and push you. But at the end of the day is you have to live through those moments alone. Yes, I'm on the field here and we're all doing the same drill, but when it comes time my turn to do the drill and go to the goal, I'm there by myself. We're in the game and we're doing penalty kicks. Yeah, my teammates are doing the penalty kicks with me. My teammates are on the bench cheering us on. The fans are watching, but like I am the one who has to step up and kick that ball. So I thought that, even if it wasn't intentional, was a really good way of framing how it takes a village, but you also have to like be the one to do it, you know? But she gets picked, which is great. Christy gets picked. And then, don't worry, we backtrack a week to make things more confusing. So now we're 5 weeks out. We were 4 weeks out. We find out who gets picked. We're now 5 weeks away from the World Cup. So we've gone back a week. There seems to be a high rate of moms returning, which I just thought was interesting. So I was just wondering if like women don't return to sport typically after they have a baby because of physical changes with the baby, because of just, the fact that you have a kid you don't have to take care of, time constraints, and also for women that return to their sport after having a kid, does like what is their rate, what is their performance rate or percentage compared to before pre having a kid? Just some thoughts. I'm sure there's some research on that, but if anyone else has some thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them. So we now fast forward a little bit. We're 2 weeks out from the World Cup, and this is my thoughts on Megan Rapinoe that I said I had earlier. She chooses now to like announce that she's retiring. She like does a press conference with the coach, and she's like, "Well, before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that this will be my last World Cup." And I just feel like it's a strange time to do that. And like, I don't know you, I don't know your life, babe. It was just to me, it was like it was notable. It was like odd enough. So it's game day. Vlatko says something along the lines of like being calm with the ball, but making sure we have urgency everywhere else. And that's something I've tried. Like I believe that's how a game should be played, and that's something I've tried to impart while I'm coaching, while I'm playing in the goal. So I just thought I really liked how he articulated that idea, and it kind of made me think of like the role of a leader, not specifically not just the coach, but like returning players, more mature players on a team. When you have these newer, fresher, greener players, like your role is not just to play better than them, is you have to guide them, you have to build them up. This is something I thought the breakdown of the team was interesting. From what I saw, we didn't really get to see the whole team, so I don't really know the exact breakdown, but the proportion of like new players to returning players that we saw, I thought was interesting, and that definitely I think factored into how the rest of the tournament went for them. Now to episode 3. Do we think athletes today are better as a whole than athletes in the past? And if it like why or why not? I think yes. Christy says there are 10 good teams, but the gap keeps getting smaller. So for a really long time, the U.S. women's team is dominating the game, right? I think in the last World Cup they said they won the first game 13-0 or something like that, like when they played Vietnam. I think as the standard of play increases, expectations obviously increase, and I talked about this a little bit with my dad actually. So I'll cut in that clip. I know I talked about this with him for sure.
Yeah, like back in the day, it was when I was growing up, it was Pele. Pele was king.
Yeah.
And then along came Maradona from Argentina. Right now you have Messi from Argentina also.
Hmm.
But yeah, we have had the greats over the years.
What I said was essentially that when athletes today are better, and I think part of it is like what the human body is capable of, like evolutionary, like what the human body evolves to be capable of. What I'm trying to say, but also like Megan Rapinoe said earlier, is if you can see it, you can exceed it or you can pursue it. She doesn't like that. And like, okay, like Michael Phelps' record, one of his records got broken the other day, and he was there to see it happen. It's like, yeah, if there's this little kid growing up swimming and knows what this is the time Michael Phelps hit on this event, right? Okay, now I know what I need to achieve. And if you're driven enough, why can't I do better than that? And I think that has its pros and cons because as a society and as individuals we achieve more, but also I think it becomes harder and harder to be celebrated and be content because you continuously like as the bar gets higher there's like, oh, you're always like, oh, there's more I could do, I could be doing more, which, you know double-edged sword. Also, this idea of like playing not to lose is brought up in this episode, and this kind of comes up in the next episode, but also this idea of you can play well and still not achieve a lot, but you can play poorly and not achieve a lot. And which would you rather? You'd rather play well and not achieve a lot. But they play this team, they beat Vietnam 3-0. Then we backtrack and we start reflecting on the 1999 team. Again, we've heard my thoughts on the timeline of this episode. I think I've touched on the 1999 team. But a couple things I thought they said were interesting is women's for women's soccer, like we have to be so much more, which I talked a little bit about it in the beginning. And also they were talking about like cleaning their shoes or something. They're like, if we were the men's team, we'd have someone to do it for us. But these girls were like, yeah, we had to go out and sell tickets. We had to convince people to play. we had to like prove that we were worth watching. And they were, and then the teams after that were like, well, now we have to prove that that investment was worth it. So just this cycle, and women's sports deserves more than it's getting. That's a conversation for a different day. We are now one day out from the game for the Netherlands, and I said maybe I should have said someone explain the general rules of soccer. So please cue Mr. Anderson explaining the general rules of soccer to the best of his ability.
How does soccer work?
Football, yeah. How does it work? Like for example, like one of my questions was in water polo when you start the game, the players start on like each team starts on their half,
Right.
and you drop the ball in the middle, and you have a swim off for the ball. So whichever team gets the ball first has possession of the ball. I imagine they're not running across the field in soccer because that's like a long field, right? So like, who gets the ball first in soccer?
It's already decided which side is gonna kick first.
Well, how do they decide which side kicks first?
I
Oh, so coin toss. Okay, so that's
yes.
how the game starts. A coin toss and determines.
Right.
Okay, next question. How many people are on a soccer field at one time? Because I was watching them pick in the show. They're like picking the roster for the World Cup, and it seems like so many girls. And they were like half of them that they talked to were forwards. How many forwards are on a soccer team
I think it's
match?
11.
Okay. Is it 11 field players or 11 people, including your goalie?
Include the goalie. Goalie is
Okay.
equal and then 10 players.
Thank you very much. We are now at game day versus the Netherlands. We haven't seen or heard from any of the U.S. goalkeepers. I I don't know if anyone else noticed this. If it's really that big of a deal. I don't know how good our goalkeepers are. Is like the U.S. known for having good goalkeepers? I don't know. I'm a goalkeeper, however, and I had some questions because then we see a group photo, we see the girl playing, but like we never hear from her, and I just feel like a keeper. We heard from about 15 different forwards. I wrote it down. There was like a crazy number of forwards. You got three goalkeepers. You can't talk to one of them. I'm sure they have some unique insights. To get on my soapbox, I think a good goalie, like goalies, it's such a black and white position because, like, if like, I think my theory is in any sport that has a goalie's fine. 90% of goalies are fine. You know, they're not spectacular. They're not really bad. They do their job.
Right.
You know, 5% of the time they're bad, and 5% of the time they're really good. Right, like noticeably on one of those two sides of the spectrum. And I might be biased because I am a goalkeeper, but a bad goalie, no matter how good your team is, a bad goalie could lose a game for you
Right, of
because
course.
it doesn't matter how many goals you're putting up, right? If you don't have a goalie who can block anything,
Right.
it doesn't matter.
Right.
Whereas I feel like a good goalie can win a game for you because it doesn't matter
Right.
how bad your team is if nothing's getting in.
Right. That's true.
You know, so like within reason, I think it's easier for a bad goalie to lose a game for you than a good goalie to win a game for you because you do still have to go put goals in.
Right.
But that really changes the whole pattern of the game. I don't know how much that like how much that's true in soccer. I believe it's true to an extent for any sport with a goalkeeper, but I know a soccer field's so big, whereas in water polo, when I'm thinking about it, we spend a lot more time closer to the goal. Whereas in soccer, I remember the first soccer match I like properly sat down and watched, and I was like, they don't get close to the goal ever. But anyway, I just think we should hear some of your goalkeepers. We should hear from more people on the team or less people on the team, but not this weird middle ground. There's a little bit of a tiff in this game between, I think, Lindsay, I want to say, but one of the players on the US team and one of the players on the Netherlands team. And the player on the US team, she's like, I needed that anger because she was like getting kind of into it with the girl, and her teammates are like, no, listen, listen. We like they get like a corner kick or something. She's like, listen, like just show her up, like make the goal. That's how you're gonna get her back, which is the best revenge. And they do in fact score a goal, so it's wonderful. Got a little header in there. Another thing that came up in this is I didn't know where my role was just yet. And something that people were criticizing the coach of this team for, if not in this game, but in the next game, is he didn't sub anybody. And I don't think he used the subs as liberally as he probably could have, from my understanding. And I think it's hard when you're new to a team. I think it's hard when, even if you know the team and you're on the bench, it's hard to know where your place is. You're not like a starter. Hard to know where your place is and when you're right to speak up and in what ways. When you're new to the team and a sub, doubly harder. And even when you're like a leader on the team, this is something that's going to come up later, kind of towards the, I don't want to say downfall, towards the like We've hit the climax. We're coming back down now. It is you need to have the ability, like in terms of coach's role versus player's role, is these older players, these captains, these more experienced players need to have the ability to speak up for themselves and for their teammates. And I'm not putting it all on them if things go wrong, but I think that's when you are entrusted with that role and that job, you need to push the boundaries almost a little bit of it to prove that you deserve it. We are 3 days out from the Portugal game. I don't know how many days they get between games, but it seems like a good amount. Here, the tone of the show kind of shifts. It starts taking on like this hopeful tone, but for the sport as a whole, and kind of thinking about pools of talent in different countries and how like why some countries succeed. So, like I said, the standard is constantly being set. I think when a team is dominant for a while, every other team wants to rise to meet their level of play. But then eventually we adjust to that level of play. We learn ways to get around it. That team that was dominant is no longer dominant. Someone else is, and thus the cycle repeats. But we're constantly then pushing every country to be better. Every country is slowly getting better. Not that like the team that was on top gets worse. It's just we're kind of skipping ahead. Okay, we're playing trouble. We're skipping ahead a little bit. So I like that there was a hopeful tone. We're hopeful for the sport of a whole as a whole, but the show didn't make sense to get hopeful about the sport as a whole because it needed to stick to being grounded about the team. I think at the end we could have then been like, okay, yes, this is what happened in the show. Um, this is where the future of soccer is going in America. This is where the future of soccer is going as a whole. But again, oddly paced, oddly edited. This episode finishes with what I think is a both a devastating and really cool quote, and it is by the width of the post and the skin of their teeth, the United States have qualified. Because they're playing Portugal, the game ends tied, and Portugal had a shot on goal that bounced off the post and like literally saved the US's life. So I thought that was a cool quote. So great. They've qualified. We're in the last episode. They are going to play Sweden. Everyone is being very negative. There's this one girl named Carly who was on the national team at some point. Now she's announcing. I think it's very bold of her, not her specifically. Like yes, her specifically in the show, but I think it's very bold to be so critical of people whose shoes you have been in because they are being criticized in a different way that you were because there's this expectation of success and performing well and a standard that they have set, whereas you all were fighting for your lives just to get respected as a sports team. So I'm not saying you can't be critical, but she was like being a real Debbie Downer in my professional opinion. We're gonna wrap this up because my light is going on its merry way. We're playing Sweden. The game ends tied. We end up going into penalty kicks. Okay, Christy gets called to take a penalty kick, which is crazy because she has not touched a ball for the entire World Cup. This is her first time touching it. But one thing I like, she was like, "Listen, like, why not be confident? You know, like if this is the end all be all, send it. You know, just full send it." So she does. They end up losing, unfortunately. We hear more about the Swedish goalie and how fantastically she played than we hear anything about any American goalie, which is certainly a choice and a decision that's made. We skip to 3 weeks after, and this kind of where that idea of like playing well and not succeeding versus not playing well and not succeeding comes up. And I think it's really interesting that my light died. Um, we finish the game, we lose. It's devastating. We skip to 3 weeks um, after the World Cup, and what I thought was interesting was they end up they fire the head coach and kind of this idea of like why the head coach gets doesn't get a second chance but the players do because like some of these players will return probably and play again. It's not like they're like written off the international stage forever. But I think that kind of relates back to what I spoke about earlier and the whole when your idea of like when you're a leader on the team and like a returning player on the team, you need to be able to speak up and like a couple of the players said like what we were doing wasn't working, and I wonder how many of them voice that to their coach because a good player I think can one voice that and two work within a game plan and also without it. Not blaming the players, I just think that's interesting that like a coach kind of gets a one shot and done because it was Vlatko's first year coaching the national team. Now, the craziest thing about all of this, okay, which probably goes back to my editing complaints, editing and production complaints. This is the World Cup where the Spanish head coach, the head coach for Spain's team, kissed one of his players live on TV. And that's just a crazy sentence for me to have to say. Just in the year of our Lord 2023, right? That's still happening. Would we have known that that sort of behavior was going on if Spain hadn't won? And if Spain hadn't made it to the final and the US did? You know? Not like, oh, we're looking for a silver line. It's just like crazy that this one moment that could have very well, very easily not happened, been like became the catalyst for such a big movement. And then the guy was like on TV, like at a meeting, talking about like I'm not gonna resign, and we're clapping for him. Someone in the show says the rot runs deep, and I was appalled. They're clapping for this man saying I will not resign after he kissed a player live on TV. And then like so one of the one of the players on the US team said like it was sad basically because when they won the World Cup they got to go on tour and enjoy it and take the trophy around and like go to their friends and family, and like the Spanish team didn't get that. The Spanish team was now in this fight for their rights, you know? But I guess the overarching theme is women's sports have to be so much more, because in the 2019 World Cup, they were talking about how the US team was fighting for equal pay. They won, they got that argument. And something I like that was brought up is yeah, okay, the women's national team got equal pay, but like that's not the same case for pro soccer around the world, or pro sports around the world in general, or even pro sports in America. But like, yes, this one instance we've gotten this victory, but there's still many strides to be made. And like every time you think you've made a step forward, oh, here comes a coach harassing his players, and we've made 15 steps. I that's just mind boggling to me. And we needed to commit to talking about the sport as a whole, because I feel like that's a bigger conversation. And I'm sure documentaries have been made about it, but like you couldn't do this without talking about it, but I think it deserved more than it got. And the only reason I feel like it felt disjointed goes back to the we didn't commit to a player profile or a team profile or a sport profile. I'm glad things are better. That like even though that stuff like that's still happening, there was a global movement for it. You know, um, because I remember when that happened. Like, I remember when it was happening, and the outrage that I feel like there was outrage online sooner than there was a statement from the player almost. Not that like I'm criticizing her or like that she needed to be the face of this movement, because that's like a traumatizing thing to go through. But like the world I felt was so supportive from what I saw, the part of the world I was in, thankfully, um, was so supportive that, I think that made standing on business, for lack of a better phrase, that much easier for the players and for the team. So I think it was hopeful on an individual player level. And this is at the end of this episode is when Megan Rapinoe says like once you can see it, you can go beyond it. The standards that we set will always be surpassed, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I love sport. I think that once you know you can achieve something in sport specifically, it makes every other aspect of your life better, because no matter what's going on, you're like, I can kick a ball. I can run up and down a field. Like I can do these things. All in all, I just think sport's a beautiful thing. I think everyone should have an opportunity to do it to whatever level and extent they want to. I think we will continuously push ourselves to be better. And I don't think there's ever going to be a limit, because we will find new ways to challenge ourselves. It's not like, oh, someone can only like, there's only so fast a person can run. There's only so quickly we can finish an F1 race, There's only so many goals someone can score in one season. There will always be a new challenge, a new obstacle that we will create in the interest and for the sole purpose of defeating it. So, I love sport. It's a beautiful thing. Thank you for sticking with me. Netflix, please edit this docu-series better, or hire me. My light is dead. My head hurts. It's dark outside. I will see you next week. Thanks for listening. Don't quote me on that. One day we'll have an outro, but it's not today. The way that I ball, no yellow, the ref had to give me a black card.